The next speaker is someone who you should all be familiar with within this community. Dr. Mik Kersten wrote the awesome book Project to Product 2 years ago, and it summarized his 20-year journey to understand how to make developers truly productive. I think this is such an important book because it helps define the common language needed between business and technology that we need to be able to compete and win in the marketplace. His flow framework defines the 4 types of work that software engineers work on: its features, defects, debts, and risks. But his book also defined the flow metrics, which I must admit I love, but I'm not sure I could actually explain it to someone else. And this is despite knowing how powerful of a diagnostic tool it is, because I've seen Mik use it to reach astounding conclusions about technology dysfunctions with a precision and ease that I've always admired. Which is why I've asked him to give this presentation. I love it because I can now finally understand the cause and effect of certain symptomologies that I've seen in my career for decades, and can now better follow along and see how and why Mik makes his diagnoses and the resulting treatment plans. I trust you will find it as dazzling as I do. Here's Mik.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Mik Kersten. I need to admit that I am not a real doctor. My PhD is in computer science and software architecture and flow, but I do promise to make some very specific prescriptions for you today. I'm happy to be joining you from Vancouver, Canada. DevOps Enterprise Summit is my favorite conference of the year. And to me, the most important part of it is actually these experience reports, the case histories that we learn as organizations share their transformations, their journeys through DevOps over the years. So for me, that learning accelerated about 2 years ago when, at this very conference, I released Project to Product on IT Revolution Press. Ever since that time, I've been helping executives understand value in software delivery, and I've spotted some very common pathologies and dysfunctions that I'll be sharing with you today. All of this data is grounded in some very detailed clinical study that was done by our flow team, Carmen Diardo, Dominica de Grandis, and Naomi Lurie, who analyzed, dissected all of these different data sets across many enterprise organizations. So I'm going to share with you some of the most interesting and some of these very high stakes transformations where the futures of companies and jobs were on the line, but where technology was a bottleneck and where transformation was moving too slowly. For me, really, some of the inspiration behind this was this book by Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The headline story of this book was Dr. P. He had a problem with his vision. He went to the eye doctor, and he was having trouble recognizing faces. Now, he was getting increasingly embarrassed about this. Oliver Sacks visited him and noticed that there was actually a deeper problem than just his eyesight as was originally thought. He actually tried to pick up his wife's head and put it on as a hat, which obviously Sacks noticed was kind of a profoundly wrong thing to do. Next, he brought a rose to Dr. P. He went to his home, handed the rose to Dr. P, and said, "What do you have? What are you holding?" Dr. P said it's convoluted red form with a linear green attachment. And so me, this was fascinating because this is exactly how I've seen people describe technology problems with a sort of similar perspective that seems so foreign to me as someone who's spent a lot of time on those technology problems without basically seeing parts but never seeing the whole. So you can only imagine the kind of treatments without the understanding that Oliver Sacks built up that would have happened. Sacks realized that this was not an eyesight problem, this was visual agnosia. He encouraged Dr. P to use his other senses. The moment Dr. P smelled the rose, he instantly realized that he was holding a rose and he was delighted by the rose. The moment his wife started moving and talking, he realized she was his wife. Yet, for so many of the executives I've worked with who've never had a chance to code, never honed those senses, what it's like to be solving technical problems way down at those lower levels, I've noticed they have this inability to see technical debt for what it is, but they badly want to. So the question to me was, are there other senses that they have, that organizations, that leadership has, that we can use to make tech debt visible to those who cannot see it directly? And here's my quick story around that. So this is the story of the CIO who mistook tech debt for a hat. This is a highly capable technology executive. I've been working with them closely. They're inspirational to me, and I've been learning a lot from these interactions. And interestingly, they took some of the concepts from the enterprise DevOps community and the Project to Product book very seriously, and they started making a massive investment in technical debt. Now, the interesting thing was, and the kind of first red warning around this patient for me was that they were investing over 50% of all teams' capacity, dozens of teams, capacity in tech debt reduction because of the problems that they were seeing in their platforms and their delivery. And I thought that was actually quite high. This was also putting a lot of pressure on development teams. So feature capacity, of course, becomes dramatically reduced because of this balance that you need to have in the 4 flow items: features, defects, risks, and debts that come from the flow framework. And the assumption was that there was this huge bottleneck that was purely located in development. Yet when we took a different lens on this, when we actually used our flow diagnostics approaches and tools, we saw a very different picture. When we analyzed flow times, so how long it took to get time to value, we noticed that there were odd things happening on the business side, because this technical debt investment was actually causing all of these scope changes to be made all the time. And those scope changes had been happening for years, and those scope changes were actually the source of that technical debt. So while they were working on it, they continued, work was being fast-tracked, made urgent, and it was a never-ending battle. There was no way to take down this bottleneck in the middle, because that was not the cause of the bottleneck. It was those scope changes and the interactions with customers in the business, and how these platforms were basically anchored to old sales models and customizations of the software. There was also another downstream bottleneck in terms of the operations side. So those features and the tech debt improvements were actually never making it to customers. So of course, over-focusing on the middle was the wrong thing to do. This organization needed to focus on both the downstream problem with the outsourcing and infrastructure model that they had on that side, and of course, change to investing in the platform rather than all these bespoke software deliveries, which was really the goal. That was actually the entire goal of this digital transformation. So the effort was going into the wrong place and the wrong amount of effort, and all being basically placed on dev where the problem wasn't. So the key thing here is that this executive started to see the real picture, that software is not static. They started seeing the dynamics. They started being able to visualize this flow, understand where to invest. And that was really done by helping them use their other senses of business results. Because when we focused the conversation just about time to market, it was obvious that some business processes and outsourcing relationships had to change. And so the key thing that we realized through this is that measuring flow actually opens the door to these kinds of clinical diagnoses for digital transformations and some very